Good morning, y'all, and welcome to Need to Know. Let's get started. So before we get into the stories from this week, I want to explain a little bit about what Need to Know is, since this is our first episode of Need to Know. So basically, as part of Need the News, which is the overall brand, I am planning to create these weekly videos, Need to Know, that cover the biggest stories happening in our world today. Mainly, it will be national news, US news. Maybe one day I'll expand to do more international news, but it will be more domestic focused. And the goal is to not just like throw a bunch of bad news at you, even though I know a lot of the news happening in the world is usually bad. The goal is to give you the news in a way where you can process it, where it's not like overly sensationalized, where it's not a lot of doom and gloom. It's to help you process what's happening, how should you be thinking about it, maybe, and what you should do, what you can do if you want to be more involved. And if not, like, how can you think about it in a way to where you can still get through your everyday life and it's not like, oh, I never want to hear the news again. So that's the goal with this experiment. I would love feedback. So if anybody has any thoughts about how I could do this better, what I could change, I would love to hear that, because I really want to make a news product that is engaging. People like to listen to it and hear it, and that is also just helping people get through the news in a mentally healthy way, and in a way that is sustainable and that you can keep going with your life and everything. So that is what I'm trying to do with this. So a lot of the topics we will talk about in Need to Know, they won't be breaking news topics. That's not what this is. Breaking news is usually fast and quick. This is supposed to be a little bit more thoughtful, a little more engaging, a little less just bam, 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 this is what's happening. So this is really an opportunity to take a step back and still be informed while like maintaining your sanity. So let's dive into this week's story. So a lot happened this past week in the U.S. Supreme Court. A lot of rulings were made. And so I'm going to spend some time talking about that today. And we're going to talk about some different rulings and what they mean. And usually I'll do like 2 or 3 different stories, but since so much happened in the Supreme Court, I thought it was necessary to cover what was actually going through. So there's a ton going on. So this is going to be a very dry run through of what happened, what it means, and like what you can do now. So bear with me. So I'm getting most of this reporting from the Associated Press. I'll include a link to their page that is dedicated to Supreme Court coverage. So you're welcome to look at that if you would like to research this topic more and just find out more about individual rulings that the Supreme Court made. So the first ruling was really over presidential power, and it expanded presidential power pretty significantly. So previously, the president couldn't fire the leaders of different governmental agencies and stuff like that without identifying some sort of cause, like negligence or something like that. So before this point, that is how it was. Congress had passed several laws to kind of restrict the executive branch's authority in firing the leaders of these organizations. I believe it was mostly to maintain some sort of stability and prevent like extreme turnover. But the court decided last week that the laws that limited this presidential power in that aspect were unconstitutional. This is a pretty major expansion of presidential power. It could give the president the ability to completely change agencies that Congress designed to kind of be independent from the executive branch. But the court did rule that one aspect of the executive branch is safe from this ruling, and that's the Federal Reserve. So the leadership at the Federal Reserve cannot be fired at the will of the president. So they did protect that one agency of the federal government. And so why is this important, right? So presidents have wanted to have more control over the Fed for years. This is not new. The reason is because it directly impacts and regulates the economy, right? So presidential approval numbers are usually directly related to how well the economy is doing at any given point in time. So having more control over whether or not the economy is going well, or there's a perceived like good things happening in the economy, can really impact what the president can accomplish elsewhere. So this is not a new thing. I mean, this is something that's been trying to happen for a while. But the Fed will remain independent for now. So there's that. Another ruling that the Supreme Court made last week, and we're getting more into immigration policy now, and that was Mullen versus Alotrolado. I might be pronouncing that very terribly, and I'm sorry if I am. But the court allowed border officers to restrict asylum applicants at the border and facilitated ending protections for temporary protected status beneficiaries. I wanted to read that so that I made sure I said it exactly how the court ruled. But this basically means less people will be able to apply for asylum in the U.S., and more than 1 million temporary protected status beneficiaries lost their protection status. So this includes people from Venezuela, Haiti, and Afghanistan. I'm sorry if you can hear my cat. He is getting involved at this point. But that was one of the rulings that the Supreme Court did last week. Another one to do with immigration policy was Trump versus Barbara, and the court upheld birthright citizenship, but it also said that it would allow denying citizenship to children born to parents who are in the country illegally or temporarily. So they did uphold that birthright citizenship is a thing that exists, that is supposed to be honored when people who do not have citizenship in this country give birth in this country. Their child will have citizenship. However, it does not apply for people who are in this country illegally or temporarily. So there's that. And then the last ruling that we'll talk about today, because there's a limited amount of time. There's a ton of rulings. The Supreme Court just did a ton of rulings this session. So definitely check out the AP's website. They go through all of them so you can really get up to date on what's happening. But this will be the last one we talk about, and it's about transgender athletes. This was West Virginia versus BPJ. And the court found that restricting female sports teams to biological females does not violate the Equal Protection Clause under Title IX. And so this essentially means that local school boards and states can restrict transgender female athletes from participating in female sports. So that was a lot. And it is very possible that regardless of your politics or beliefs, you might not agree with some of those decisions. So first, I want to talk about how I process news like this, if I might disagree with it or I might agree with it or however I feel about it. This type of news that's on such a high level, right? It seems like there's nothing you can do about it. How do I process that type of news? So I typically try to remember our country's history and its resilience whenever stuff like this happens. So we've had plenty of cycles of expansion and reduction of powers, whether it's congressional powers, executive powers, judicial powers. Our country has seen a lot of movement in those areas. And yes, some of these things are very different than what we've seen in the past. However, there's been plenty of things that have happened in the past that aren't happening now. And we've just gone through so many things in this country and been able to overcome them, and it works out and we calm back down and everything's okay. So I try to remember that whenever I just hear news that is so above my pay grade, right? So above anything that I feel like I can really influence. I try to remember that every branch always wants more power, and it's always exacerbated by political parties trying to gain more power. And we're still standing. We just celebrated the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. That was yesterday. I'm recording this on Sunday, so that was yesterday. And we are still having the same arguments that we had 250 years ago at the beginning of our country, and they will continue to happen. And it's part of the great American experiment, is that we can have these conversations and debate them. And sometimes some moves are made and then they're changed 20 years later, and that's how it goes. But you just have to remember the big picture here. This is not the end of our country. We're still going to keep going, and it's going to be okay. So if that's not enough for you, though, if you're still like, wow, this is really bad and I'm kind of feeling helpless at this point, I want to give you some actual things that you can do to hopefully help you feel empowered, help you feel like there is something you can do, because there are things you can do. So here are a couple of them. The first one, it's going to seem like nothing. People always say this, and I feel like it kind of falls on deaf ears, but really go vote. Go vote. That is the biggest thing that you can do. And talk to your elected officials. If you disagree with any of this stuff, that's part of the process of civically engaging, is talk to your elected officials. Hopefully it'll be a good experience. Hopefully they'll hear you, and urge them to introduce legislation that you agree with or that you believe will help change the course of what's happening in the Supreme Court right now. So the Center for American Progress, make sure I say that right, the Center for American Progress has a list of reforms that could help mitigate what they have called judicial overreach. So if you do believe this is an overreach of the judicial system, then you can definitely go to that list and see what they have to say. And if you agree with that, call your congressional leaders, call your elected officials, and see what they can do to help implement some of those changes. I would also encourage reaching out to your locally elected officials. A lot of times when stuff like this happens, we're only thinking on the federal level, right? We're only thinking, oh, we need to go and talk to our Congress people and to our senators and make sure that they know what's up. But I think people would be really surprised how much locally elected officials can actually influence change that really impacts the people directly around you. And any type of change, it always starts at the local level. So I would definitely encourage also reaching out to your locally elected officials. You never know what they might be able to influence. I'm sorry, my cat still wants to be involved. He's coming over here now. A third thing you can do is you can donate to a local organization that can help people impacted by these changes. So that could include the National Immigrant Justice Center or Advocates for Trans Equality, or there's a number of organizations that help immigrants, help LGBTQ plus people. And they would love volunteers. They would love financial support. So that's another thing you can do. That's very impactful. But that's it for today's episode of Need to Know. This was our first episode. So thank you so much for watching or listening. And I'll see you next time on Need the News. And this is perfect because Hamilton decided to show up today and he'll probably be here a lot. So you got to meet him as well. So great. See you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please click subscribe. You can also follow along on Instagram for behind the scenes moments and updates throughout the week. And to support my work directly, subscribe to my Substack and get access to my bi-weekly newsletter. Until next time, stay curious and stay grounded. Thanks, y'all. You just had to be involved, didn't you, buddy? Had to be involved.